the reality is, am I a killer? Could I murder someone? Could I take someone's life? And I think for, all of our young people, really, the answer is no.
Andy Peters is a schools intervention and prevention officer with the West Midlands Police. That means he works closely with schools to build relationships with students to encourage positive alternatives to crime such as knife crime or gang culture. He works with 7 schools in the local area, and he's seen a real positive change in being a good police presence in the schools. He's also worked really closely with us to develop our show Switch Up, which addresses knife crime. And he's even had a star turn as a cameo in our VR experience where he did quite a scary stop and search, which was great. So welcome, Andy.
Thanks, Emily. Great to be here.
So we're going to launch straight in. Knife crime, we know, is sadly on the rise across the country, and particularly in the West Midlands. We've got 178 incidents roughly per 100,000 people. So it's quite a scary thing, and it's something that we need to take seriously. But we know that for a lot of people, knife crime is something that they don't really know much about. Maybe they're not involved. They think, oh gosh, I'd never carry a knife. So why is knife crime such a big deal for young people today?
It's a great question, and I think the reality is it's more so around an individual. The impact for me is when a knife comes into that equation, when a knife is used, it's the impact on the community. Certainly individuals are affected, but we see this, from up and down the country, but certainly here in the West Midlands, there are many cases where a community has been impacted, and the work that I do in the schools, it really has a ripple effect. It may not be anything particularly too close to home, but that impact that's on the community and how young people are affected, I think that's why it's just so important that even young people who are saying that they would never carry a knife need to be aware of the consequences for themselves, but also for their friends as well.
Sure. And so what is that impact on the community? What would that look like?
We're seeing varying degrees, really. The impact that we've seen here quite recently is not only someone who's been injured by a knife or lost their life to a knife crime incident, but it's actually the people that are involved. Some people who have perhaps been present during this attack where a knife's used and find themselves being arrested, find themselves with criminal records, custodial sentences for simply, in a way, being there. And that's how impactful it can be. And so for those young people that are saying, I'd never carry a knife, that's my concern, that they could be part of an offence without particularly realising the severity of it.
Yeah, and I suppose for the wider community, it kind of breeds fear, doesn't it? And suspicion, and maybe people feel like they can't be safe in their own environments.
There is, and we hear from lots of young people when we ask the questions and we do our workshops within the schools, everyone's carrying a knife, and that kind of sentence gets bandied around really freely. The reality is that's not the case. We know 99% of young people don't carry a knife, and we need to kind of reinforce that message to dispel the myths of I need a knife for whatever reason. And of course, the most common response that we get from young people around why are young people carrying knives, for that protection, for that self-defence, perhaps because they're feeling scared in their community. But we do know that so many young people don't carry knives, and we need to kind of promote that positive statement as opposed to, allowing the students to think that it's a must, that they something that they need to carry.
Yeah, so you want to promote the positive peer pressure of actually not that many people are carrying, rather than the peer pressure of everyone is, so I feel like
absolutely, I have to. Absolutely. And we'll challenge those kind of conversations with young people. And, it's quite eye-opening for them when they realise, well, actually, no, my friends aren't carrying knives, but just that statement seems to be so impactful that every young person is carrying a knife. And of course, that then filters out further into the community with people that will see and hear things, social media, in the news, and have a fear that, we're not safe here in the West Midlands. We're a safe community. We have got to focus on knife crime. There is more work to be done. But, certainly here in Dudley, it's a safe place to be.
Oh, that's really positive. It's really good to hear. So for the people that are carrying knives, what are the risks faced by young people that are carrying?
The biggest risk is being injured by their own weapon. And that's a message that we give out to young people, that you're more likely to be injured if you carry a weapon. Could the people in our schools here pick up a knife and take it out to the community? Yes, they could. I think it's quite simple. We've got so much access to knives within our homes. They don't have to be purchased from the internet. The kitchen knife, for example, that can be found wherever in the house, is something that I think any student could probably, in the heat of the moment, pick up and take out into the community for whatever reason. The big question comes is if there is an issue and that knife comes into the equation, if that knife comes out of a pocket or out of a bag, can they use it? Would they use it? And that's where I think, there's so much uncertainty that we've got young people injured by their own weapon because, yes, they could probably take a knife out, but could they use it? And that's where I think, we've got so many good young people here in our communities that they may feel the pressure to take a knife out. Yeah. But then can they use it? Probably not. And that's when young people find themselves in a really difficult, compromising situation.
So it's that gap between, I feel like I need to kind of put on a front, be able to defend myself, pull a knife out. But actually in my heart, I'm not somebody who could use a knife against somebody else.
Absolutely right. And the reality is, am I a killer? Could I murder someone? Could I take someone's life? And I think for, all of our young people, really, the answer is no. Yeah. And they find themselves potentially in that really difficult position.
And the danger is when you're against somebody who would use it against you and does have that kind of killer instinct, I guess.
And it's not only a killer instinct, really. We look and we have the police training, how to deal with situations because, of course, as a police officer, we don't know what we might be dealing with, but our body will tell us how to deal with things. And that could be through the fight, the flight or the freeze, an instant reaction as to how we respond. So for some young people, they may instinctively run off. For some young people, they might freeze. But for some young people, their instinctive reaction could be, my life has been threatened, I will fight back and I will fight to defend myself, even if that means taking another life. But that's that instinctive reaction that actually, until we're in that situation, we probably don't know how we're going to react. As police officers, we have to have lots of training to put ourselves in those positions to say, well, we will deal with it professionally and how we need to deal with it. But of course, that's different out in the community for people that perhaps haven't received that level of training. Yeah,
it's more unpredictable, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So it's interesting that by choosing not to carry a knife, you're more likely to be saving your own life as well as saving somebody else's life. It's protection for yourself to actually not carry one.
Completely agree. And it can be a difficult decision. People can be under peer pressure. There are groups of people, young people, that will naturally amongst themselves make a decision that this is what we do. But by not carrying a knife, it absolutely, as far as I'm concerned, saves lives. For people getting involved in disagreements out in the community or even within the schools, okay, we might end up with someone with a black eye, with an injury, but they can recover from that. And so, it's absolutely huge that young people are aware by not taking out a knife, we're potentially saving lives.
And something that we try and do with our work is empower people in knowing themselves and knowing the choices that they make. And we know that in knife crime and gang culture, there's the factor of kind of peer pressure and the expectation to behave in a certain way, even if it's against sort of who you are inside, is a massive factor. And so what we want to do is empower people to know who they are and to know that the choices that they make are important. But obviously there's a lot of pressure on young people to behave in a certain way. And one of those pressures is this county lines thing where people get sucked into this network of having to behave in a certain way. And even when they know they don't want to be involved anymore, they're kind of too far along the line. So can you tell us a bit more about county lines, what the risk of that is, even what it is in the first place?
And it has different names and different meanings, but the professional term of county lines, I think quite simply is moving something. That could be drugs, that could be weapons, that could be money from a certain point. And here in West Midlands, we're more so known as an exporter of those type of things, the drugs, the money and the weapons, into maybe a more rural area. But we know there's another side to this part of county lines within these group of people and the gangs that operate using young people, is that young people can be enticed. They can form a friendship. They can think that they are in charge, in control, but they soon get exploited in the sense they may be robbed by their own gang and all of a sudden become indebted. And at that point, there are threats that are made because of the friendships that are made before. These people will know a lot of information about young people, where they live, who they associate with, and we know that they can be threatened. They can be threatened for harm to come to themselves. I think the concern that we have with young people is when threats are made to their family.
Yeah.
And then they feel trapped. There could be things that, has been done on social media, online, through messaging that actually could be criminal offences, and they're threatened that would be reported into the police. And so young people then perhaps don't know where to go. They know that they're in too deep, but don't know how to get out of it. And so we try and educate on that as early as possible, really, when we think that, it's an appropriate time for young people, in an attempt to stop it from happening. But county lines is another concern where there are drugs, there are weapons involved, and it brings us back around to that, knife crime issue that we have within our communities.
It's really scary, isn't it? Because you think of a stereotype of someone who might get involved in a gang, but often it's a bit more insidious, where people don't quite realise what they're getting sucked into. So you think that you've got kind of an older friend who's looking out for you, who's taking you to the chicken shop or buying you some trainers or kind of just giving you a little job here and there. And you can actually get sucked into something that's like way beyond your control. And like you said, maybe by the point you realise that actually I don't want to be involved in this anymore, you might have already moved some drugs around, or people know a bit too much about you. So as a young person, when you realise, actually, I'm probably in trouble here, but I want to get out, what can they do and who can they speak to that will kind of support them to get out of that, rather than having to hide away or get sucked in further?
It's really difficult, isn't it? But of course, for me, and the biggest or the most people that I will ask young people to trust in are those that they live with. Okay. Those are the people that are at home, because for me, they're the people that will be there for them until they take their last breath. They're there lifelong, and that could be parents, that could be carers, and it could be a really difficult conversation. And it's taking young people to be brave, to say, actually, I have done something that I shouldn't have done, but I didn't realise at the time what I was getting into. I've not yet met a parent or a carer that, hasn't said they won't support that young person when they've made the wrong decision. And I think we've all been there when we look back at our lives, and even as a police officer, I think young people probably have an interpretation that, I've never made a mistake, and, I never get things wrong. And of course, that's not the case. Growing up, experiences, it's the best way to learn. But relying on people that are going to be there for us. I think young people sometimes can rely too much on their friends. Okay. And my view, and it's only a personal experience, is that the friends who I went to school with, I don't really see anymore. It's not that I don't like them, but the world changes, our lives change. I have my own family, I have a different set of friends. I still have my parents that were there for me from when they took me to school to, so many years later. So I think it's really important that those conversations take place at home. Yeah. We know in schools that there is a teacher, there is a member of staff that a young person will have some kind of rapport with, that they could talk to. For some students, they're not keen on school, they're not keen on every member of staff, but it just takes one person that could be that saviour, really, that person that can help. And I think, not to take it lightly, that is someone that could save a life again. Yeah, amazing. That person could save a life by the young person just opening up and asking for help.
So you talked a bit earlier about how for young people, obviously friendships are everything. And once you get in with your group of friends, you're tight, you don't want to let them down. You don't want to be the person that's holding everyone back or the person that stands out. And I think that plays into this kind of idea of gang culture, knife crime, through something called joint enterprise, which is the idea that if you are with a group of people where somebody has a knife, you can be held equally responsible for if that knife is used. So can you just tell us, what does that mean? And practically, what would happen? What are the consequences for being with a group of people where someone has a knife, even if it's not you?
I think that's where we get the biggest reaction when we're delivering our workshops to young people. And we'll ask that question, we've had young people stand up and go, so what would happen to this young person if person A's got a knife, person A uses the knife, but person B, C, and D just happened to be there. And you're absolutely right. We've had cases here in Dudley within the last 12 months where we had exactly that. One young person has used a knife, but there were 4 people in total that were involved in a disorder. And all 4 people were sentenced to a life sentence, with the minimum sentencing at 16 years in prison.
Wow.
And for young people, yes, they're supporting their friend, but they didn't take a knife out that day. They didn't use a knife that day, but they were part of that offence. And absolutely, the courts decided that they were guilty of murder via joint enterprise. Another term that we use really to try and make it clear or simple to young people is guilty by association. You're associated with someone who's committing an offence such as that with the knife. You're part of it. You're part of that problem. And unfortunately, again, it's this issue with knife crime is that before, I suppose, when it happens, we're in too deep. And that's the concern that, everything's fine until that knife comes out into the equation, and it is catastrophic when it's used, and people then are wishing that they'd maybe made a different decision, wishing they hadn't gone out that day. And that can be for young people that they know their friend carries a knife, but they don't want to snitch, they don't want to grass, they want to, if they then go on to use that knife, their friend uses that knife, they'd find themselves guilty of a joint enterprise offence.
So it's really important to recognise, isn't it, that we are all part of communities. We're not kind of just existing as individuals. And actually, you have the responsibility to choose whether you want to spend time with people that have your best interests at heart, or whether you're with people who just have their own interests or kind of want to use you or manipulate you to further what they're doing. So looking at the community around us is really, really important. And in your role, have you seen where a community has had a really positive impact on each other, or how they can best support young people? What are the positive things that communities can do?
I think just having a look at that word initially around what is a community, and I think, people understanding, it's quite easy to say, oh yes, I live in a community and that's great, but what does that actually mean? And I think it's changed over the years as to what community means, but certainly here, within Dudley, within the West Midlands, there's some great things going on within our local communities. We've got different church groups, we've got different boxing groups, football clubs, and actually, with the work that we do, we can see that there are conversations around knife crime. There are conversations around making the right decision within all these different groups now. And I think it's supporting each other. It's relying on each other. It's being brave enough to talk about things with each other within our community to help. And we do see from time to time people that maybe are saying that's not my problem. I don't want to get involved because of, there is always a way of helping and supporting our community. And that could be reporting something anonymously because we don't want to be seen as someone that might be, talking to the police. It could be that people or young people are in fear of any repercussions because they've spoken up about things. So I'd really encourage the community, I'd really encourage young people and teachers and parents to be promoting certainly the Fearless website, where we can report things anonymously, we can get some information, how we can support each other and how we can do the right thing. Again, with that community, the kind of message that I give to young people whenever I'm delivering workshops or sessions or even one-to-one sessions is it's making people proud, and it's trying to find a person in that young person's life that they can say, do you know what, if they were looking at you now, if they could see what you were doing now, would they be proud of you? And if we've got to think about that, I think, well, maybe we need to change what we're doing. We need to just stop and reflect on what we're doing in society. If we can say, yeah, I think they would be proud, then that's brilliant, that's fantastic, and, really keep doing what you're doing. And I think if we've got kind of adopt that attitude, the community will get stronger.
And I guess it's also for us as friends or community members to think it's not just enough for me to not carry a knife or to sort of not, get involved, to look away, but actually to look for people and say, I am proud of you, or I see what you're doing there and I really appreciate that. And, in those other places, in the churches, in the sports groups, in the youth groups, looking out for friends and looking out for what they're doing, and empowering them to make choices which are positive for them, and for you and for the community around you, and to kind of encourage people that they are important, that they have an important role to play in the community. I think that's really, really great. So it's the website that you said is the Fearless website. What's that?
Yeah, and it's part of Crime Stoppers,
Yeah.
the national organisation where people can report things anonymously. I mention Fearless because it's more so aimed at young people, and that's something that we want to promote within our schools because it is difficult for young people. I completely get it. Now being much older, without being under that peer pressure, without needing to impress anyone, that's fine for me. And I can speak about, not carrying knives, making the right decision. But for young people, it's not that simple. And I completely get that as well. But in order to save lives, in order to protect people, my biggest fear is the next person that features on the headlines of the newspapers or national news because they've lost a life to knife crime is your friend, is my friend. And that's the reality, and that's the risk. And it's only at that point, I think, that for young people, they realise the severity of it. And so there's an opportunity there. We've got people that we can speak to within the community, within the schools. There are ways of reporting things online.
Yep.
And I can only try and encourage young people to do that and to make that right decision, to try and protect themselves and to try and protect their friends and family.
Yeah, and they can do it anonymously without consequences. But what it's doing is getting another knife off the street and giving somebody else more of an opportunity to live a full and healthy life.
It is, and I think for young people, the fear is the police. The fear is, oh, will my friend get a criminal record? Will they be arrested? The fear for me is that your friend may well not see another day.
And so with that in mind, the question that we ask everybody, if you could give advice to your younger self, what advice would you give yourself?
I think for me, it would be just to pause, just to stop. Life seems so hectic. Everything seems so fast-paced. And especially, there certainly were mobile phones around as they are now, but life's even faster, and we always seem to be in the thick of some action and maybe just not pausing and just taking stock of what's happening. Is this what I want to be doing? Is this the person that I want to display to my community? Am I making the right decisions? And the questions that we probably ask young people is, what are the consequences of your actions? And sometimes, a lot of the times perhaps, we don't give ourselves the times to think about what are the consequences, what is the worst case scenario. So for me, it would have been just pause, just stop, take a deep breath. The world's still revolving, but we can slow down and we can just have a bit of a look around and go, actually, yeah, I'm heading in the right direction here. Life's good, life's positive. If we need to amend things, that's an opportunity just to take stock. And maybe we need some help, maybe we need some support. And so that's certainly a big one for me. And the other one with our friends, I challenge young people now all the time to say, hey, look, if your friend's up to a bit of mischief, not maybe doing the right thing, give them a nudge.
Okay.
And say, hey, hang on, we don't all have to go down that path. Come on, we can do better. And I think young people, they'll listen to each other more so maybe than a police officer delivering a workshop, in a school. So can you be that friend that actually encourages people to do the right thing too? And I think that's really important.
Amazing. So take a breath, collect yourself, collect your friends, know that you're probably more important than you think you are, and that you have more of an impact than you even think you can have on the community and on the world around you.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Andy. It's been so good to hear from you, to hear your expertise. And I think you've given us real hope for the role of the community that we can play in preventing knife crime.
Thanks, Emily. Been great to talk to you.